Hello, welcome to another installment of Coach Garrett's Exercise Library. Bench fly for mobility. So the main thing with our bench fly for mobility, as opposed to activating muscle gains in our chest, is that if we go too heavy, we won't be able to get into the active resisted stretch. So everything else is the same. But as we come here, we want to make sure our shoulder blades are squeezed together, and then we're allowing the weight to give us a stretch. If we start with too heavy of a weight, we're not going to let ourselves get that stretch, so we want the weight to be heavy enough to just give us a little bit of a stretch and have to challenge our ability to be active through that stretch to come back up. We don't necessarily have to touch together here if we don't want to, because that might pull our shoulder blades apart. But again, as we get into the next one, if we did touch, we just want to reset our shoulder blades flat to the bench. I'll allow the weight to just give us this stretch through the chest and then actively come out of that stretch. Side lunge. So slightly different than a cassock squat. Side lunge can be kind of anything where you have this wide stance and you're lunging to the side. So a cassock squat, as I think of it, you could do with a goblet or just upright, where you're pressing your knee up and trying to stay more upright. For a side lunge, I think more about a hip hinge and getting some good glute activation. So I would actively encourage people to have a really wide stance and then be reaching their hips back through a nice hinge motion. So it's more of a single leg hinge than a single leg squat. And then also making sure to come all the way up and reset with a glute squeeze. So hinge, squeeze, hinge, squeeze. And I think it can be just as effective without all the stepping in and out stuff. But if people wanted to step in and out, they could. But just having feet be static is another option that's more stable. Curtsy lunge. So curtsy lunge, we're reaching the back foot across and then going straight down, straight up. So I think reaching back a little ways and then a fair amount across is going to give people a wider base of support and allow them to press both feet into the floor to support that. If we're just thinking that the foot kind of goes back here, it can be a little bit tippier. So getting a really nice diagonal reach back for that is what I would recommend. And people could support themselves on that front leg or on something else as they need. I feel like about once in 5 times I do curtsy lunge, doesn't feel very good on my knees, so it's not right for everyone all the time. Bicycle crunch. So people do bicycle crunches really fast. I like to cue them really slow, where the focus is not necessarily on squeezing my neck and head up as hard as I can, but rather the focus is on that brace and hollow body position. So squeezing across while keeping the low back relatively flat to the floor, depending. So I wouldn't necessarily have to be crunching my neck up. I can have my abs more or less turned off and do that knee to elbow stuff. But if you slow it down, focus in a little bit more on that brace and hollow body position, I think it gives a fuller activation of the core. You're still going to get your obliques and some of those rotational core muscles if you do the less core active way, but not as much. Zigzag hops. So a zigzag hop just means we're hopping side to side and moving forward and back. So you could stop after each one. If people are still progressing into any sort of hop, you could string them together. You could use a line on the floor. You could do a certain number forward and back. You can also do these single leg. Again, pausing after each hop or stringing them together as you like. Diagonal sticky jump. This just means we're jumping out diagonally. So a big step and a pause. We're working on single leg balance and a big diagonal extension, pause. So it's similar to what people might think of as a speed skater or a diagonal leap, or a lateral leap, But the goal here is that we're jumping a fair amount and pausing in that single leg balance. Jump, pause. So it can be done with a big step or a jump But the key, that sticky bit, is that we're pausing to force ourselves to balance on one foot for a little bit. 1, 2, 3 Heisman. Some people might call this just a Heisman shuffle. First option, I would say, would be just the steps and the Heisman shape. So 1, 2, 3, and then our Heisman shape is that knee and elbow squeezing towards each other, so it's that cross body activation. It's not a big crunch down, it's more of a lifting the knee up towards the elbow. 1, 2, 3, squeeze. 1, 2, 3, squeeze. So that's our stepping variation. The shuffle, the 3 and the squeeze happen at the same time. So it's 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So speeding it up, pausing at the end are just variations and ways to make it more intense or unstable. Wall ball cluster. Wall ball cluster. So our typical wall ball, we do a clean anyways. So we're getting the ball off the floor. Some people might just sort of get into their squat right from the floor. So a cluster is a clean. So we're going to clean the ball all the way up to our shoulders. Then we're doing our thruster, which involves our front squat plus our overhead. So that would be one wall ball cluster. So coming back down to the ground, tap, fully extend, fully squat, wall ball. So we wouldn't want people to be doing their wall ball and then catching with this like rounded hinged back to get down to the tap. We would still want people to be picking up the ball from a strong position, whether it's a little bit more hinged or squatted, doesn't really matter. Full extension at the hip, full squat. And then I'd say catching, however you would most strongly catch your wall ball, and then go down for the tap and the clean. So it's kind of like a double pump. Up for the clean, up for the wall ball. Catching, probably mostly in the squat, just making sure people aren't just catching with their arms or catching with their back in like a unstable bent over position. Ground to overhead plus waiter step up. So single arm dumbbell variation will be tapping the ground, coming up into like a clean and press. That's how I would do it. And then waiter step up. I feel most stable opposite leg on my object, powering up, coming all the way back down. If I wanted to, I could do that again. Ground to overhead and alternate my lead leg. Same thing. Then if I was doing a certain number, at some point I would switch to the other hand and do the same thing. If people wanted to do something more like a snatch, or something more like a clean and press and jerk, also great. That waiter step up requires you to be really vertical, so it's harder to use as much glute. So you almost have to use a lot of calf to get yourself started, and then a lot of quad to finish the step up, as well as a lot of core. So lighter weights, lower step up height than people are probably used to for either a waiter walk or a regular step up.